Before Dracula became a vampire, he was a real man, not a creature of the night, not a monster hiding in a castle, not a myth created to scare children. He was a prince, a soldier, a ruler, and one of the most feared men in medieval Europe. His name was Vlad III of Wallachia, but history remembers him by a darker name, Vlad the Impaler. For centuries, people have argued about what he really was. To some, he was a defender of his homeland, a brutal but necessary ruler who stood against one of the most powerful empires in the world. To others, he was a nightmare in human form, a man who did not hesitate, a man who did not forgive, a man who understood that fear could be sharper than any sword. The stories about him are so extreme that they almost sound impossible. Enemies displayed as warnings, nobles punished without mercy, cities forced into silence, armies stopped not by walls, but by terror. And in the middle of it all stood one man, watching his enemies break before they even reached him. This is not the story of the Dracula from movies. This is the story of the man behind the legend, and the truth may be darker than the myth. In the summer of 1462, one of the most powerful armies in the world marched into Wallachia. The Ottoman Empire had already conquered great cities, crushed kingdoms, and expanded across continents. Its soldiers were experienced, its commanders were confident, and at their head was Sultan Mehmed II, the same ruler who had captured Constantinople and changed history forever. He was not a man easily frightened, but as his army moved deeper into Vlad's territory, something felt wrong. The roads were too quiet. Villages were abandoned, fields had been emptied. There were no crowds begging for mercy, no defenders waiting in formation, no proud prince standing outside the city gates. Only silence. Then the Ottoman army approached Targoviste, Vlad's capital. What they found there was not a battlefield. It was a message, a field of death, a forest of stakes. Thousands of bodies, according to later accounts, displayed as far as the eye could see. Men, prisoners, enemies, people turned into warnings. The scene was meant to do something no ordinary army could do. It was meant to reach inside the mind, to tell every soldier, every officer, and even the Sultan himself, this is what happens when you enter my land. Whether every number in the old stories is exact or exaggerated, the effect of the legend has never disappeared. Because this was Vlad's true weapon. Not just violence, not just punishment. Psychological war. He wanted fear to arrive before he did. He wanted his reputation to fight for him. And it worked. To understand how a man becomes this feared, you have to understand the world that created him. Vlad was born in the 15th century, in a land called Wallachia. Today, that region is part of Romania. But in Vlad's time, Wallachia was not a peaceful kingdom protected by stable borders. It was a dangerous frontier, a small principality caught between larger powers. To the south was the Ottoman Empire, expanding with terrifying speed. To the west and north were Hungary and other Christian powers, each with their own ambitions. Inside Wallachia itself, powerful nobles known as boyars competed for influence, changed loyalties, betrayed rulers, and backed different claimants to the throne. Power was not something you inherited and quietly kept. Power was something you seized, lost, recovered, defended, and sometimes died for. A ruler in Wallachia could not afford to look weak. Weakness invited rebellion. Mercy could be mistaken for fear. A soft ruler could be replaced by his own nobles before an enemy army even arrived. This was the world Vlad was born into. A world where politics was personal, where betrayal was common, where a throne was less like a seat of power and more like a target painted on a man's back. Vlad's father was Vlad II Dracul. The name Dracul came from the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order connected to the defense of Europe against Ottoman expansion. The word later became tied to darker meanings, and eventually to the name Dracula. Dracula originally meant something closer to son of Dracul, the son of the dragon. But history has a strange way of changing names. A political title became a legend. A prince became a monster. And a real man came the shadow behind one of the most famous horror characters ever created. But long before the novels, the movies, and the vampire myths, young Vlad was growing up in a brutal political world. And one of the defining events of his youth was captivity. As part of political negotiations, Vlad and his younger brother were sent as hostages to the Ottoman court. This was not unusual in medieval diplomacy. Powerful rulers often demanded the children of smaller rulers as guarantees of loyalty. But for the child sent away, it could feel like something else: a golden cage, a polite prison, a place where you are treated with respect, but never allowed to forget that your life depends on your father's obedience. Vlad spent part of his youth among the Ottomans. He saw their discipline, their court, their power, their methods. He learned their language, their military habits, and their way of ruling. But he also learned what it meant to be a pawn, a hostage, a prince without control over his own fate. That experience likely left a mark. The Ottomans were not just a distant enemy to him. They were part of his childhood, part of his humiliation, part of the fear and anger that shaped him. While Vlad was away, Wallachian politics continued to tear itself apart. His father was eventually killed. His older brother died in violence as well. The family was not simply defeated, it was betrayed, and betrayal would become one of the central themes of Vlad's life. When he later returned to power, he did not rule like a man who believed in trust. He ruled like a man who had seen exactly what trust could cost. Vlad's early reigns were unstable. He gained power, lost it, returned again. This was common in Wallachia, but in Vlad's case, each return seemed to harden him. By the time he secured the throne more firmly in 1456, he was no longer just another prince trying to survive. He was a ruler with a method, and that method was fear. Many rulers use fear occasionally. Vlad made it central. He wanted criminals to fear the law. He wanted nobles to fear betrayal. He wanted foreign enemies to fear invasion. He wanted everyone to understand that his mercy was limited and his punishment could be immediate. There is a famous story, often repeated in later accounts, about a golden cup placed near a public fountain. The idea was simple. Anyone could drink from it, but no one dared steal it. Because under Vlad, theft was believed to be punished so severely that even desperate people were afraid to touch what did not belong to them. Whether this story is literal truth or political legend, it shows how people remembered his rule. Order through terror. A clean street because no one dared commit a crime. Peace, not because people loved the ruler, but because they feared what he would do. That is the terrifying paradox of Vlad the Impaler. Some people remembered him as a bringer of order, but the order came at a price. It came through dread. And once dread becomes the foundation of government, no one feels safe. Not the thief, not the noble, not the soldier, not even the servant standing close to the throne. Because a ruler who makes fear his language can always find a new person to punish. Vlad's most famous punishment was impalement. It was not invented by him, and it existed in different forms before his time, but he became so associated with it that his name became inseparable from the method. To modern ears, even the word sounds almost unreal. But in Vlad's world, public punishment was often meant to send a message. Executions were not always hidden. They were staged, displayed, turned into warnings. And Vlad understood the power of spectacle. A single private execution could remove one enemy. A public punishment could frighten 1,000. A field of victims could freeze an army. That was the logic. Cruel, cold, effective. For Vlad, punishment was not only about the person being punished, it was about everyone watching. He turned fear into communication, a silent announcement that said, "Do not betray me. Do not steal from me. Do not invade my land. Do not imagine that I will hesitate." And this is where he becomes more than just another violent medieval ruler. Many kings killed, many lords tortured, many armies committed horrors.
But Vlad became legendary because he used cruelty like a strategy. He understood that the mind breaks before the body. He knew a terrified enemy might retreat before a battle even began. He knew a noble who had seen other nobles punished might think twice before plotting. He knew a city that had witnessed his justice might fall silent. That is why his name survived, not because he killed more people than every ruler in history, but because he made people remember how he killed. One of the most infamous stories about Vlad involves the boyars, the noble families of Wallachia. These were not ordinary citizens. They were powerful landowners, political players, men who could support a prince one year and betray him the next. They had helped shape the instability of Wallachia for generations. Some had been involved in the violence that destroyed Vlad's family. To Vlad, they were not just nobles. They were a threat, a disease inside the state, and he wanted to break their power. According to later traditions, Vlad invited many boyars to a feast. There, surrounded by food, wine, and ceremony, he confronted them. The atmosphere must have been tense. These were men used to influence, used to negotiation, used to surviving one prince after another. But Vlad was not like the others. He reportedly asked them how many rulers they had served in their lifetimes. The answer revealed the truth. Too many. They had seen princes come and go. They had outlived dynasties. They had learned how to bend, betray, and survive. Vlad saw this as proof that the nobles were the real power behind the throne. If princes kept dying and boyars kept living, then the throne was not secure. So he acted. Some accounts say many were executed. Others say the younger and stronger were forced into labor, made to help build or restore a fortress. The details vary, as medieval stories often do, but the message is consistent. Vlad wanted the boyars to understand that the old game was over. He was not going to be another prince they could manipulate. He would not share power with people he considered traitors. He would rather destroy them. This is one of the reasons Vlad's story is so hard to simplify. Was he cruel? Absolutely. Was he paranoid? Possibly. But was his paranoia born from nothing? No. He lived in a political world where betrayal was normal and rulers died violently. His answer to that world was not reform. It was terror. He did not try to persuade the nobles. He crushed them. He did not try to build loyalty slowly. He forced obedience immediately. And for a time, it worked. But a state built on fear always carries a hidden weakness. People may obey you, but they do not necessarily love you. They may serve you, but they may also wait for the first moment when your power slips. That shadow followed Vlad throughout his life. Outside Wallachia, the greatest threat was the Ottoman Empire. By the middle of the 15th century, the Ottomans were a force that Europe could not ignore. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople, one of the most important cities in the world. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Christendom. It proved that the Ottoman army could break what many had believed was almost unbreakable. and Wallachia stood close to this expanding power. For Vlad, the Ottoman threat was not theoretical, it was immediate. The empire expected tribute, submission, political obedience. Vlad had once been a hostage in that world. Now he was a ruler facing it. At first, like many frontier rulers, he had to balance survival with resistance. But eventually, his relationship with the Ottomans turned into open conflict. He refused to behave like a passive vassal. He attacked Ottoman positions. He struck across the Danube. He used speed, surprise, and brutality. Vlad did not have the resources to defeat the Ottoman Empire in a grand, open war. He could not match its size. He could not match its wealth. He could not match its manpower. So he fought differently. He made the war personal. He made it frightening. He made every road, forest, and village feel unsafe. This was not just military resistance, it was psychological warfare. When a smaller ruler faces a larger empire, he has limited choices. He can submit, he can negotiate, he can flee, or he can become so terrifying that the cost of conquering him feels too high. Vlad chose terror. His campaigns against Ottoman forces were marked by harsh tactics and ruthless displays. He wanted the empire to understand that Wallachia would not be easy prey. Every attack had to carry a message. Every punishment had to echo beyond the battlefield. And by 1462, the conflict reached its most famous moment. Sultan Mehmed II launched a major campaign into Wallachia. This was not a small raid. This was the power of empire moving against a defiant prince. Vlad knew he could not simply stand in an open field and fight like an equal. So he used the land itself. He retreated. He burned supplies. He emptied villages. He poisoned wells, according to some accounts. He made it difficult for the invading army to feed itself or move comfortably. This strategy is called scorched earth. It is brutal for civilians. It leaves suffering behind. But it can slow a larger army and weaken its confidence. Then came one of Vlad's boldest moves, the night attack. In June 1462, Vlad launched a surprise attack against the Ottoman camp. His goal may have been to kill the Sultan himself. Imagine the scene. An enormous army resting in the dark, tents stretching across the camp, horses shifting in the night, fires burning low. Then, confusion, shouting, movement, attackers rushing through the darkness. For a few hours, the order of empire breaks into chaos. The attack did not kill Mehmed. It did not destroy the Ottoman army. But it added to the legend. Vlad was not waiting passively behind walls. He was hunting. Even against a stronger enemy, he was dangerous. Even surrounded by overwhelming force, he could strike. But the moment that truly sealed his reputation came afterward. The Ottoman army continued toward Targovishte, and there, according to the most famous accounts, they found the forest. This is the scene that belongs at the center of the story. Not because it is the only thing Vlad did, but because it shows exactly how he wanted power to work. The city was not defended in the normal way. There was no glorious battle outside the gates, no heroic duel, no speech from the walls. Instead, the invaders found horror arranged like architecture. Stakes standing in rows, bodies displayed as warnings, a landscape transformed into a message of pure fear. Later stories say the sight was so shocking that even the Ottoman Sultan was disturbed by it. Again, numbers and details from medieval sources can be difficult to confirm perfectly. Propaganda, enemy reports, and legend all shaped Vlad's image.
But the fact that this story survived so strongly tells us something important. Vlad's enemies wanted people to remember him as a monster, and Vlad himself may have wanted them to remember him as something close to one. Because fear was useful. If the enemy believed he was capable of anything, they would hesitate. If they hesitated, he gained time. If they feared capture more than death in battle, their courage weakened. This was the dark genius of his reputation. He became a weapon before he even appeared. In modern warfare, nations use propaganda, intimidation, shock tactics, and psychological operations. Vlad did something similar in a medieval world. His methods were primitive, but the goal was sophisticated. Break the will. Not just the army, the will. That is why the Forest of the Impaled remains one of the most chilling images in European history. It was not random cruelty, it was organized terror. And organized terror is often more frightening than rage. Rage burns out. A system continues. Inside Wallachia, Vlad's rule was remembered with the same mixture of fear and strange admiration. There are stories of him punishing thieves, liars, lazy officials, dishonest merchants, and corrupt nobles. Some tales present him almost like a harsh judge, a man who made crime disappear because punishment was certain. Others present him as a tyrant whose cruelty went far beyond justice. The truth may lie somewhere in the darkness between those images. Vlad ruled in a violent age, but even by the standards of his time, his reputation became extreme. That reputation did not come from nothing. German pamphlets printed after his lifetime helped spread terrifying stories about him across Europe. Some were likely exaggerated. Some were shaped by political enemies. Some were meant to entertain readers hungry for horror. But they also show that Vlad's name had already become a symbol, a warning, a character people could use whenever they wanted to describe cruelty without hesitation. In those stories, he is not shown as a conflicted ruler. He is shown as a man who kills instantly, a man who punishes small offenses with monstrous severity, a man who eats calmly while others suffer nearby. Some of these tales may be propaganda, but propaganda works best when it grows around something people already believe. Vlad's real actions gave his enemies the material they needed. They did not have to invent a gentle man and turn him into a monster. They took a terrifying reputation and made it larger. This is one of the most important things to understand about Vlad the Impaler. There are three versions of him: the historical ruler, the political monster created by his enemies, and the supernatural Dracula created centuries later. Over time, these versions blended. The real prince became harder to separate from the legend, but the center remained the same. Fear. Every version of Vlad is built around fear. Fear of invasion, fear of betrayal, fear of punishment, fear of the ruler who does not blink. And maybe that is why he still fascinates people today, because he represents a question that history returns to again and again. Can cruelty ever protect a country? Or does cruelty always become its own kind of destruction? Supporters of Vlad sometimes argue that he defended Wallachia against impossible odds. They point out that he resisted the Ottomans, punished corruption, and tried to create order in a land full of betrayal. To them, he was brutal because his world was brutal. A soft ruler would have been destroyed. A merciful prince would have been replaced. A weak man would have vanished from history. But critics see something else. They see a ruler who crossed the line between justice and terror. A man who became so obsessed with control that human life became a tool. A prince who made obedience more important than mercy. A leader whose punishments became larger than the crimes. Both views can contain truth.
history is rarely clean. Vlad was not a cartoon villain. He was not a vampire. He was not simply evil for the sake of evil. He was a medieval ruler shaped by violence, betrayal, captivity, and war. But understanding him does not mean excusing him. A man can be shaped by a cruel world and still choose cruelty. A man can defend his land and still become terrifying to his own people. A man can be brave against an empire and still be remembered as a monster. That tension is what makes Vlad's story powerful. If he were only fictional, he would be easier to understand. But he was real. He had political goals. He had enemies. He had reasons. And still, the methods he used became so infamous that his name survived not as a national administrator, not as a diplomat, not as a reformer, but as the Impaler. That is the title history gave him, and titles like that are not easy to escape. Vlad's reign did not last forever. Like many rulers of Wallachia, his power was unstable. He lost the throne, regained influence, fought again, was imprisoned for a time by the Hungarians, returned later to claim power once more. His life was not a straight line of conquest. It was a cycle of rise, fall, survival, and return. A man constantly surrounded by enemies rarely dies peacefully, and Vlad did not. In 1476, during another struggle for power, he was killed. The exact circumstances remain debated. Some accounts say he died in battle. Others suggest betrayal or confusion. His body disappeared into uncertainty. His head, according to tradition, was sent to Constantinople as proof that the feared prince was dead. For the Ottomans, it was a trophy, a final answer to the man who had humiliated them. The ruler who had turned fear against an empire was now reduced to a symbol of defeat. But death did not erase him. In some ways, death made him stronger. Because once a person becomes a legend, facts are no longer enough to contain him. Stories travel farther than armies. Rumors last longer than kingdoms. And Vlad's story had everything legend needs. A dark prince, a mountain land, castles, war, betrayal, blood-soaked reputation, a name connected to dragons and devils. Centuries later, when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, he did not create Vlad the Impaler's biography. The vampire Count Dracula is a fictional character, not a simple retelling of Vlad's life. But the name Dracula helped link the real prince to the fictional monster in the public imagination. And once that connection formed, it became almost impossible to break. Today, when people hear Dracula, they think of vampires, capes, castles, fangs, immortality. But behind the entertainment is a real historical shadow, a man who did not need supernatural powers to terrify people. He did not drink blood to become feared. He ruled through fear. He did not rise from a coffin. He rose from a world of war and betrayal. He did not command wolves, he commanded soldiers. And he did not haunt villages as a ghost. He haunted them as a prince. That is what makes the real Dracula more disturbing than the fictional one. A vampire belongs to fantasy. Vlad belongs to history. And history is harder to dismiss, because it reminds us that monsters do not always look inhuman. Sometimes they wear crowns. Sometimes they sign orders. Sometimes they speak the language of justice, protection, and national survival. Sometimes they convince themselves that cruelty is necessary. And sometimes people believe them. The story of Vlad the Impaler is not only about medieval Wallachia. It is about power, what it does to people, what people do to keep it, and how quickly fear can become a system. At first, fear seems useful. It silences criminals. It discourages traitors. It frightens enemies. It creates the appearance of order. But fear has a cost. People stop speaking honestly. Nobles become obedient on the surface and hateful underneath. Enemies become more determined. Stories grow darker. And eventually, the ruler himself becomes trapped inside the image he created. If everyone believes you are merciless, then mercy starts to look like weakness. If everyone fears you, then trust becomes impossible. If your power depends on terror, you must keep producing terror. That may be the hidden tragedy of Vlad's rule. He built a reputation so frightening that it helped him survive, but it also consumed his name. Whatever else he was, history remembers the cruelty first. Not his childhood, not his politics, not the impossible position of Wallachia, not the pressure of empire. The word that survived is impaler. One word, one image, one legacy. And maybe that is why his story still works on us, because it feels like a warning, not only about one man, but about the kind of world that creates men like him. A world where betrayal is normal, where mercy is punished, where power changes hands through violence, where a child can be used as a hostage, where a prince returns home convinced that fear is the only language anyone understands. Vlad did not appear out of nowhere. He was produced by his age, but he also shaped it. He chose methods that made even a violent century remember him as extreme. That is the line. Many people suffer. Many people are betrayed. Many people live in dangerous times. But not everyone turns suffering into a system of terror. Vlad did. And that is why his name still feels cold. Imagine being a merchant in one of his towns. You hear that crime has fallen, roads are safer, thieves are afraid. But you also know why. Every rumor carries the same message. Do not cross the prince. Imagine being a noble invited to his table. You smile, you drink, you speak carefully, but every word feels dangerous. Because this ruler does not forget what families like yours have done. Imagine being an enemy soldier marching into Wallachia. You have survived battles before. You have seen cities burn. You have watched armies collapse. But then you reach a silent road, an empty field, a warning so disturbing that even the bravest men stop talking. That was Vlad's world, a world where silence was part of the punishment, a world where fear moved faster than horses, a world where reputation could become a fortress. The strange thing is that Vlad may have believed he was bringing justice. Many cruel rulers do. They do not always see themselves as villains. They see weakness around them. They see corruption. They see betrayal. They see enemies at the border and traitors in the court. Then they tell themselves that ordinary rules no longer apply. They say the situation is too dangerous for mercy. They say people only understand force. They say history will thank them later. Sometimes history does remember their achievements, but it also remembers the screams beneath them. Vlad defended his land, but he terrorized it. He fought an empire, but he became infamous across Europe. He punished betrayal, but he made fear the center of his rule. He became a symbol of resistance to some, and a symbol of cruelty to others. That contradiction is why a simple label is not enough. Calling him only a hero hides the horror. Calling him only a monster hides the history. The real Vlad stands somewhere between those extremes, and that middle place is more uncomfortable than fiction. because fiction lets us close the book and say, that was evil, that was simple, that was not us. History does not allow that comfort. History asks harder questions. What would a ruler do if every neighbor wanted to control him? What would a prince become if he learned politics as a hostage? What kind of justice emerges from a world where betrayal is rewarded? And when does survival become cruelty? There is no clean answer, but there is a clear legacy. Vlad the Impaler became one of the most feared rulers of all time because he understood fear better than most kings. He understood that people remember terror. They repeat it, they exaggerate it, they carry it across borders. A battlefield victory can be forgotten. A terrifying image can live for centuries. That is why the Forest of the Impaled became more than an event. It became a symbol of what happens when a ruler decides that fear is not just a tool, but the foundation of power. And symbols do not need perfect accuracy to survive. They need emotional truth. The emotional truth of Vlad's legend is simple. People believed he was capable of anything. And in politics, that belief can be as powerful as an army. The Ottomans had numbers. Vlad had terror. The nobles had influence. Vlad had punishment. Criminals had opportunity. Vlad had fear. For a brief time, he made an unstable land feel controlled. But control built on terror is never peaceful. It is only quiet. There is a difference. Peace is when people are safe. Quiet is when people are afraid to make noise. Vlad created quiet. A heavy, watchful, dangerous quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a town after everyone has learned what the ruler can do. And when he died, that quiet did not vanish. It changed shape. It became rumor, then legend, then literature, then cinema, then a name known around the world. Dracula. Most people who say that name today do not think of Wallachian politics. They do not think of Ottoman tribute or boyar betrayal. They do not think of a young hostage watching an empire from inside its own court. They think of a vampire. But the real story is better, not because it is more entertaining, because it is more human. And human darkness is always more frightening than supernatural darkness. A vampire kills because it is a monster. A ruler kills and calls it order. A vampire hides from daylight. A ruler stands in public and is praised. A vampire is feared by villagers. A ruler can make entire countries afraid. That is why the real Dracula is worse than the legend. The legend needs fangs. The real man only needed power. At the end of his life, Vlad did not become immortal in the way myths imagine. He did not escape death. He did not rule forever. His enemies eventually caught up with him. His body fell. His head became a trophy. His principality moved on. Other rulers came. Other wars followed. Other names entered history. But somehow, Vlad remained. Not as he truly was in every detail. No historical figure survives unchanged. He remained as an image, a prince in darkness, a ruler with cold eyes, a man whose punishments became his identity, a warning from the medieval world. And maybe that is the final lesson of his story. Power can win battles. Fear can control people. Cruelty can build a reputation that lasts longer than a kingdom. But it comes with a cost. The ruler who uses fear may be remembered, but not always the way he wanted. Vlad wanted to be feared by enemies. He was. He wanted traitors to hesitate. They did. He wanted his name to travel. It did. But once a name enters legend, the man loses control of it. The prince became the Impaler. The Impaler became Dracula. And Dracula became a monster that millions know, even if they know nothing about the man behind it. That may be Vlad's real immortality. Not a throne, not a dynasty, not a peaceful legacy, but a shadow. A shadow cast across centuries by a ruler who discovered that fear could make him powerful, and then discovered, too late, that fear would define him forever. So the next time you hear the name Dracula, do not picture only a vampire in a castle. Picture a real prince standing in a violent land between empires. A boy once held hostage. A ruler surrounded by betrayal. A commander facing an army too large to defeat in the open. A man who decided that if he could not be stronger than everyone else, he would become more terrifying. That decision made him legendary. It also made him infamous. And more than 500 years later, the world still remembers him by the name he earned in fear. Vlad the Impaler, the real Dracula, the ruler who turned terror into power, and power into a nightmare.